Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Bisma and I'm back with another episode of Strengthening Women Up Our Times, Her Own Way. Today I have a very special guest. She's special because of her diverse experience. She's an entrepreneur, she's a trainer, she's a consultant. She has worked with organized organizations in Pakistan, outside Pakistan, UAE, UK, and Bangladesh. She has worked with 170 organizations. At the same time, she is an entrepreneur also. She is founder and lead trainer of ITC, the Institute of Training and Consultancy. She's a reputed trainer in Pakistan, training consultant in Pakistan, and has been providing training and consultancy for around since 1984. She is Arshi Ahmad-Aziz. Assalamu alaikum, Arshi. Welcome to Her Own Way.
Wa alaikum salam. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
Pleasure, Arshi, pleasure. Arshi, like it says, her own way. So what's your own way of working and dealing things? How do you go about situations?
Okay, well, I mean, I think situations kind of vary. I think that's true for all of us. I think that when we work and when we work within organizations or even external to organizations, you're meeting people, both men and women, a diverse range of people, and that leads to different experiences. And each experience demands a different approach sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. So Arshi, who is Arshi?
Well, when I think of myself, I think that one of the things that we don't do enough of as women is to understand what being a woman means to us, because for each one of us, it is different. And I think that once we come to a conclusion, कि हम हैं कौन, हम चाहते क्या हैं, हमारे जो goals हैं, life goals, work goals, whatever, are they off? या किसी ने हमको कहा है कि नहीं आप ये करें तो वैसे ही होता है. I think that we need to understand ourselves as women. And when I think of myself as a woman, obviously I'm colored by my personal history. And my personal history is that I was born into a middle class, medically orientated family. Both my parents were doctors. I was born in the UK, which explains this English accent. And, I was well educated. I did both a degree in law and a master's, and so my story, in a sense, would be different to other people's story, and yet one of the things that I find really interesting is that as women, we have this enormous commonality, and the commonality is about who we are and some of our experiences. And I think also it's cultural context, because in a South Asian context, we are pushed in certain directions. There are certain, kind of expectations of you as women. And that basically is underpinned by your relationships. So who am I? Well, work-wise, I'm a trainer, consultant, a counselor, a writer. Home-wise, I'm a wife, a daughter. Well, I was, not anymore, but I was a daughter, a sister, a khala, a puppy, all of those relationships which guide us. I'm the mother of 2 daughters, so that too. Yeah, so.
That too. Okay, so Arshi, in your experiences, as when you are so many things, so when you are fulfilling so many relations, and you have, when you're in professional life, you're doing so many things. How do you keep the Arshi thing alive? what makes sure that, what you do that makes you Arshi and, your sanity is intact?
My sanity sometimes isn't intact. I think that all of us, again, I come back to this, that, kind of thinking about ourselves and who we are and who we want to be, and making sure that that is kept intact in whatever situation we're in, whoever we are at that point in time, because we also change. So I think that's so the inward journey, the introspection, कि आप अपने आप को देखें, अपने आप के बारे में सोचें, think about who you are, what you want, and whether or not your environment actually protects that, whether it supports that or not. And I think that's important. I think I've been lucky. I think luck has a huge part in who we are and who we become. And I think anyone, certainly anyone I've talked to who's been relatively successful, will tell you that luck has had a role in who they have become. And I think my luck has been that I have been able to be myself in whatever situation I'm in. And I think I think particularly at this age, because, I've been working now for 38 years or something. So, you kind of learn to keep the balance, which when you're younger is kind of a bit of a challenge,
Yeah, exactly that balance I was talking about, and I will ask about that later also. I wanted to understand your journey. You were not always this age, right? You were a consultant, trainer, mother, and daughter, and then wife, I'm sure, and then you also became an entrepreneur. You had your own ITC, right? It's a training consultancy. So
yes.
When you're taking these things forward, Arshi, when did you decide you become an entrepreneur, and when did you decide that you will work as a consultant in organization? So what was the thought process?
Okay, well, for me personally, this is the early 90s, and which is when I moved to Pakistan. I moved to Pakistan in 92 from the UK. And initially, to be very honest, when I moved to Pakistan, I thought that I would never train again. Part of it was because I thought I would be at home wife and mother, because I assumed that that was the way in Pakistan. And indeed it was. Not for me. So part of it was that when I initially came, I had a 3-month-old, and then about a year later, I had another one, which are my 2 daughters, and a child. And so during that time, I did very little work. I used to write for Dawn. Dawn used to have a Dawn newspaper. Dawn used to have a magazine called The Review. It used to be called the Tuesday Review at that time. Later on, it moved to Thursday, and it was called The Review. And I used to write for that. I used to write for other parts of the newspaper, the science page, the careers page, all those sorts of things. So that was kind of what I did regularly. I then started work with Karachi Psychiatric Hospital. I trained as a counselor during my time in the UK. So I joined them as part counselor, part writer, because they produced a monthly magazine. So I had an input into that. So I did that for a while. And then I joined an organization called Al-Tahami. Al-Tahami was a management consultancy, a training consultancy.
Okay.
And when I originally moved to Pakistan, I thought I would not be able to train, क्योंकि मैं उर्दू में बात कर लेती हूँ, लेकिन इतनी साफ नहीं है. और अभी जो आप उर्दू सुन रहे हैं, वो इससे भी because I was new, you know.
Achha.
So I thought that as a trainer, because connection with individuals who are participants is probably the most important part of what you do, language becomes kind of like an issue. And so I kind of assumed that I wouldn't be able to train because my Urdu wasn't great. But imagine my shock when I discovered that it didn't matter if I could speak Urdu. What mattered was whether I could speak English.
Yes, I was about to say that we love this accent in Pakistan.
So, so that made a huge difference. Al-Tahami was a great learning experience. I wasn't there for long. I think about a year and a half. They didn't work out, so they closed. And then I kind of formed ITC. Training consultants at that time. I didn't really like their approach, so I, kind of just started my own company.
Yeah.
That's how it started.
Nowadays we have, we have social media, and it's slightly easier to start something. I feel that way. At least the startup cost is not there, and you certainly can do things online and digital. At that time, it must have been difficult, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a different approach for sure. It was the phone, and it was long meetings. I remember sometimes I used to go for four-hour meetings. You'd go into a company, and then they'd want you to meet people in the company. People had a lot of time in those days. ये जो जल्दी करो, ये वाली चीज नहीं थी. And so you met people both within HR, the training manager, of course, and other people, seniors in the organization, and they'd all have a say in whether you were recruited or not as a trainer. And so it was a very different process. There was a lot of phoning. So you'd call people, you'd have to print things out and send them. And in those days you didn't even have laser printers. You had dot matrix printers. So that reflected the quality of what you did. So different times. I mean, when I first started work, which was 81 in the UK, we only had typewriters. So, in a sense, I was kind of used to, that. So, yes, very different situation.
So how did you keep yourself motivated, on track, and you thought, no, this is something I have to do and get it done with? I'm asking in the perspective, see, nowadays there are females, who want to do something, they feel stuck, be it because of their, family issues, or be it because of other issues, they feel stuck. So I thought to ask you this question, that, if you could help them understand your background, where you coming from, and explain, and then if they would be able to relate, and then maybe they will be able to understand that things have never been easy for anyone. So that's why I asked you a question, that how do you keep yourself motivated at that time, and you thought, no, I am going to get this done with. Arshi will have her own consultancy at ITC, and she's going to make her mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure whether I really thought I was going to make a mark. I think you start and you see how the journey progresses. I didn't start with an office. I didn't even start with a room. I started with a desk in my living room and a phone. And that's how ITC started. And, like I said, I'd worked with Al-Tahami for, that year and a half. And that was a great insight for me of how consultancies work in Pakistan. So because all my experience in terms of training was in the UK up to that point. So I kind of learned a few things there, and that insight gave me some inroads into how to get started. So and what I needed to do. And also the other thing that happened was, because they closed down, there was no conflict of interest. So people that I'd worked with while I worked with them, I could contact them because there wasn't a conflict of interest in terms of my ex-employer and myself. So that I think success, you know, however we measure success, because it's different for different people, you know, kind of getting the odd contract, and it really was the odd contract in those days, for training, you know, kind of boosted my confidence, and then feedback from participants, from training manager and so on, that also boosted me. Were there challenges? Yes, there were. You know, sick children was one of them. You know, when your child's ill and you're kind of struggling about whether to go to work or not, but you know, if you have training appointments, as it were, you cannot mess with those because you have another 20 to 30 people waiting for you. So you can't kind of say, I'm sorry, I can't come in, my child's sick. So, you know, you have to, you know, kind of manage that. And sometimes those times were a little difficult, those sorts of things, or things that become challenges because of the situation in Karachi in the 90s, where you had a lot of strikes and a lot of disturbance on the streets, a little fearful sometimes going to industrial areas, for example, those sorts of things. But yeah, I think those were the challenges. And then people would say to me, oh, you know, you shouldn't be driving alone. But what option do you have? You didn't have Kareem in those days either. So yeah, you kind of just do it because it needs to be done.
Yeah. So this is basically the attitude which you had. You have to do it because it has to be done, right? If something has to be done, you have to do it. And so this is basically what I'm trying to extract from you, because you know you have been very humble in your conversation, giving credit to you know, your accent also, your background also. But truly, everybody goes through struggles, and it's the mindset, it's your focus which keeps you going on. And this brings me to another question. Arshi, what is failure to you?
Failure is not doing as well as you know you could have. So failure is when something goes wrong and you know you could have done better, but it went wrong anyway because you didn't handle it to the best of your ability. And sometimes that's a loss of focus. So, for example, in a training context, I remember one experience with senior managers of a very large company in Pakistan, and I think part of it was, to be honest, the woman thing. I was the only woman in the room, and I think senior managers in organizations sometimes think that they're more able than they are, because no one has ever challenged that ability. And then when you do, of course, they don't like it. And my own feeling is that any development needs to be a little bit of a challenge, not a huge challenge. It's not oppressive in any way, but you need to be able to challenge your mindset, the way that you think, the way that you do things, your attitudes and so on, in order for training to be of any benefit. Otherwise, it's of no benefit whatsoever. So personally, I don't think that facts kind of are how people learn. So the question that you asked was, how do I deal with failure? I think a little bit of analysis, you know, like what actually happened and what could I have done differently to avoid the eruption of failure. I think that. And then also to understand that in life, not everything is going to be successful. It's a very sad thought, but there it is.
Yeah.
That we, no matter how hard we try, sometimes things are beyond our control. Other people's behavior, other people's thinking, the situation, the strike situation, for example, I was talking about earlier, the weather, all those things are beyond our control. So understanding what's within your control also, I think, is a huge part.
Absolutely. Arshi, you have been working with so many organizations, so many people you have trained, and you have been a consultant. How have you made these workplaces dignified for yourself and for your successors? For women who are coming as consultants and trainers, what have you done to make sure that these are my boundaries and they are not getting violated?
Yeah, I think that that's basically two questions. I mean, the one question, if I've heard you correctly, is, okay, what have you done to support other women? And then the second question is that within the training fraternity, what have you done to support other women? Well, when I first became a consultant in Pakistan and started ITC, I think I was the first woman training consultant. And certainly I was the first who had their own company at that time. This is 94. So, I think that, I like to think that by example, like when you do something, then other people will see that, okay, well, this is such a big deal. I mean, it's not impossible. So, why not us? So I think that's one aspect of, both of encouraging other women and in terms of the training approach. So there's that. I've had so many interns in my organization. I mean, I must have had, 29 to 30 people come and go as interns during the time that ITC has been going. And also other people who've come in as co-consultants who have all been women, actually, all of them. Some of the interns have been male, but mostly women. So, that situation, encouraging people to do their thing. One of the very early colleagues, she then moved to Hong Kong and started a training consultancy there. So, so that was nice. But yeah, so different things. I think for women generally, I feel that there's not enough dialogue, and there's not enough dialogue about, what it means to be a woman and what are the underpinning issues that we experience. And again, for different people, it's very different. But I think that there's not enough conversations about what we need to do as women to support other women and what in fact would support them.
Okay. So yeah, my next question was about this thing. What can we do to strengthen women of power today?
Sorry, I'm repeating myself, but I think we need to have more conversations as women. I remember going to some session years and years ago, which was geared towards understanding women in organizations and something like that. And I was astounded because the guest speaker was a man. And I raised the question, and everyone was horrified that I'd said this. I said, why are we sitting here as women to talk about women and hearing a man? I mean, for me, that was a really basic thing. But everybody else, because this was fairly someone who was fairly eminent, may I say. So everyone was horrified that I challenged his right to be there to talk to us about what being a woman is all about, and those sorts of things. So I think as women, we need to first reach an agreement about what is important to us. Do we need the support of men? Yes, of course we do, because, in the power dynamic, men are more powerful than women. We, as individual women might be powerful, but in terms of the system is geared towards men. Any of us women who've walked down the street know that, that the power lies with men. So do we need men? Yes, we do need male support, but it needs to be given in a way which is determined by women, not determined by men, I think.
Great. That brings me to the question which you have at the back. But before I talk about women empowerment, I wanted to understand what is empowerment, because nowadays this is the buzzword: empowerment, women empowerment. These are the buzzwords, and I thought to ask you what is empowerment to you first, and then I will ask you about empowered women. Who do you think are empowered women?
Okay, well, I think empowerment is a interesting concept, because empowerment suggests that it's something that people can do to you. It's something which happens to you. You become empowered, and the inclination is to think that other people empower you, whereas my own belief, as it were, is that the only person who empowers you is you. You need to, understand yourself enough and understand your situation enough to understand what empowerment means to you. And, I think you're absolutely right, is that empowerment is something which is a buzzword from the 90s. It's in terms of the women's movement in Pakistan, it's the terms kind of continued a while. But again, I think the suggestion is of something external, which is the difficulty I have with empowerment generally as a term.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you, and that's why I wanted to ask these questions to actually understand, because these words these phrases have become cliches, and they're losing their meanings. And that's why I wanted to ask him, is like, you have started back such late, where there were not so many tools like we have today, and so social media and marketing tools are out there, and yet I find it so difficult for us to actually do something, whether it's being an entrepreneur, whether it's doing something from home also. And yet here you are, you're the first female in the training industry, like you say. So here you have done something which is remarkable. So I fail to understand where the gap is coming in, that it is getting extremely difficult for females despite the resources out there.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think, part of it was luck, is that I arrived in Pakistan at a time when training was little known. People really didn't know what training was. One could even say they still don't, but, that's a whole other story. But I think that, and I came with, kind of, I think, 8 years of experience of working in the UK, including being a national consultant in the UK and, heading a team which was focused on management development. So, in an organization. So, those sorts, part of it was luck. And part of it also is support, the times when I started to travel, which was again, the mid-90s. And of course, and you have young children. So who looks after the children? Well, the husband does, so their father. So it's having that kind of support, I think also does, of course, have an impact. I think also one of the things about my particular situation is that none of us, neither me nor my husband, had immediate relatives in Karachi. So we moved from the UK. None of us had relatives. He has a brother in Karachi. I don't have any siblings in Karachi. I have a few cousins. So we don't have that, kind of family pressure. I think there's a lot of family pressure on women to do stuff within the family. Sometimes, it's of little benefit to anyone, but it's kind of expected. So things like, uski salgirah hai, you have to go, yeah, koi faut ho gaye to milne jao, koi bimar ho gaya to milne jao, mangni ho rahi hai, shadi ho rahi hai, I mean, it feels kind of never ending. And I remember talking to a friend of my mother's, actually, who had 6 children, and they were, kind of very well-to-do people in Karachi, may I say. And she said that my whole life is just taken up with, kabhi bachon ke ghar kuch ho raha hai, ya unke ससुराल के घर कुछ हो रहा है, या उनके ससुराल के family में कुछ हो रहा है, या, there's always something, somebody's birthday or somebody's, engagement, या बात पक्की, या, and really, if you think about what women spend their time on, it's those sorts of things. So I think I had the advantage of having a lot of time.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I was thinking about the females who will be watching you. They want to do something, and what advice, as an entrepreneur and as a woman, you would want to give to them? What's your tips?
Okay. Well, I think there are a few things. I mean, I think the first thing is understand yourself. That has to be the first thing, and particularly understand what skills you have. Often I think that women are, and indeed men sometimes, but we're talking about women here, are pushed into a situation not because they have that skill set, but because people around them think that it's, a good thing to do. It's for doctors. So the inevitable was, bari hogi to doctor banegi. I mean, that was the inevitable, but it was not something which I wanted to do. So therefore I then didn't do it, but I don't have that choice. So I think that's second thing is understand your situation around. Okay. So, it's kind of understanding yourself, understanding your skills, and understanding the situation you're in the sense that understand, because I mean, let's be frank, is that the idea behind being an entrepreneur is to make money. So, whether that money is to sustain yourself or, I don't know, head. So, whatever the reason is, to understand whether the skill set that you have is needed in the marketplace. And that, is the second part. And then the third part is that if you don't have the skills, that comes into that. And when I talk about skill set, I'm not just talking about the ability to do, but also, things like your own thinking, your own attitude, and your approach. So those. Thank you so much for inviting me to share my thoughts and experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching the video. For more such videos, stay connected with us on our social media pages. Like, share, and subscribe to Red International.